She had been his closest ally for 4 years. He had trusted her with his work, his time, and in quiet moments he'd never admitted out loud, his admiration. Then one rainy night, in the back seat of a car moving through empty streets, a woman he barely knew opened her mouth and destroyed everything he thought he knew. This is not a story about money. It's not about power, though both play their roles. This is a story about a man who discovered that the person he respected most had been studying him, not to understand him, but to use him. And it's about the woman who chose truth over safety, knowing full well what it would cost her. If you're watching this, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit like, stay until the end, because the moment everything breaks open doesn't come when you expect it. Logan Pierce was not a man who complained. That was the first thing most people noticed about him. Not his height, not the way he carried himself in rooms full of people who earned in a week what he earned in a year, but the quiet steadiness he brought to every situation. He didn't flinch, he didn't sulk. He showed up, he did the work, and he went home. Home for the past 6 years meant a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of the city where the rent was manageable and the neighbors minded their own business. It meant a 7-year-old girl named Macy who slept with a stuffed elephant named Gerald and had recently decided she wanted to be either a marine biologist or a professional pancake maker, depending on the day. It meant a routine built from the rubble of grief, school drop-offs at 7:15, long days at the office, dinner that was rarely fancy but always made from scratch, because Macy had decided at age 4 that frozen food was sad. Logan had built that life with his bare hands after his wife, Claire, died from a brain aneurysm 3 days after Macy's first birthday. There had been no warning, no long illness to prepare them. Just a Tuesday morning that ended with a phone call that rewired everything about who Logan Pierce was and what he understood about the world. He'd had help, of course. His mother flew in from Portland and stayed for 2 months. Claire's sister took Macy on weekends when Logan was drowning. Friends showed up with casseroles, and then gradually, as friends do, they stopped showing up and life moved on around him even when he couldn't move with it. But Logan did what he'd always done. He pushed through. He took a job as an executive operations coordinator at Ashford Group, a mid-sized but rapidly expanding investment and development firm, because it paid well and offered real benefits, and because sitting still felt dangerous. He was 31 at the time. Macy was barely 2. And Victoria Ashford had just inherited control of her family's company, following her father's sudden retirement due to health complications. He remembered his first meeting with Victoria clearly. Most people did. She had a way of entering a room that shifted the air pressure slightly, like barometric change before a storm. She was 29 then, sharp-jawed and immaculately dressed. With dark hair she wore swept back and eyes that moved over people like a scanner, reading barcodes. She shook his hand across a conference table and said, "I've read your file. You're not what I expected." He'd said, "Is that a good thing?" She'd paused just long enough to be deliberate about it, then smiled. "We'll see." It turned out to be a good thing. At least that was what Logan believed for the next 4 years. He was good at his job in the way that certain people are good at things without anyone being able to pinpoint exactly why. He had a talent for reading rooms, for anticipating logistical problems before they became crises, for communicating with people across every level of the company in a way that didn't feel condescending to anyone. Victoria noticed. She began including him in meetings he wasn't formally required to attend. She asked for his read on situations after the room had cleared. She called him at 8:30 on a Wednesday evening, once to ask what he genuinely thought about a proposed acquisition, not what the analysts thought, not what the board thought, what he thought. He'd been flattered. He wouldn't pretend otherwise. He was a 31-year-old widower with a toddler in a medium-sized apartment, and the smartest, most successful person he'd ever met was regularly asking for his opinion. That kind of attention changes a man's posture whether he wants it to or not. But Logan was careful. He was always careful. He knew the distance between professional respect and something more complicated, and he was deliberate about staying on the right side of that line. He admired Victoria. He respected her drive and her intelligence and the ruthless clarity she brought to decisions that would have paralyzed other people. He did not let himself want anything beyond what was appropriate, because he understood that some hungers, if you don't starve them early, will eat you alive. What he didn't understand What he had no framework for understanding because he was not built that way was that some people look at qualities like loyalty and care and they see something to be managed, a resource, a weakness with a useful application. The night everything changed began the way significant nights often do, unremarkably. The Ashford Group Annual Charity Gala was held every October at Victoria's family estate in Westfield, about 40 minutes outside the city. The estate was the kind of place that made people reflexively lower their voices. 12,000 square feet of sandstone and glass set on 18 acres of manicured grounds, with a view of the valley that made the drive out feel almost worth the dress code alone. Logan had attended 3 of these events before. He knew what to wear, knew which conversations to have, and which ones to excuse himself from. Knew that the open bar was decoration more than invitation for anyone who wanted to remain useful for the full evening. This year, Victoria had asked him to coordinate several logistics around the event, seating arrangements for major donors, timing for the keynote remarks, a last-minute adjustment to the catering setup after a vendor miscommunication that somehow became his problem to fix on a Thursday afternoon. He didn't mind. It was the kind of problem he was good at solving, and solving it well meant that Victoria's evening would run without visible friction, which was the entire point. The gala itself was exactly what it always was. Beautiful, controlled, expensive. The kind of event where the smiles were practiced and the handshakes lasted precisely the right amount of time. Logan moved through it efficiently, checking boxes, making sure the keynote ran on schedule, nodding at the right moments during conversations he had no personal investment in. He spent about 20 minutes talking with Daniel Reeve, Ashford Group's head of legal, about a youth education nonprofit that had received one of the evening's major donations, and that conversation was genuinely interesting, one of maybe 3 genuine moments in a 4-hour event. He saw Victoria from across the room several times throughout the night. She was extraordinary at this, working every corner of the space with perfect calibration, switching between warmth and authority like flipping a switch, saying the exact right thing to the exact right person at the exact right moment. Logan had watched her operate in rooms like this enough times that he no longer marveled at it. He simply noted it the way you note a well-functioning mechanism. He noticed Sophia Bennett, too. He always did, though not in any way he'd ever examined closely. Sophia had been Victoria's best friend since college. That was how Victoria always introduced her, with a slight emphasis on best that made it sound like a title she'd personally awarded. Sophia worked in brand consulting and had her own modest professional reputation, but in the context of Victoria's world, she existed primarily as a satellite. She was warm in a way that felt unperformed. She laughed at things that were actually funny. She had dark curly hair she never quite managed to fully tame, and a habit of listening to people, really listening, the kind where you can feel the attention, that Logan had always found disarming without being able to explain why. He'd spoken to her at these events before, brief, pleasant conversations that he usually remembered more clearly than the longer ones. She had a directness that was rare in rooms full of people performing their best versions of themselves. Tonight she'd been quieter than usual. He'd caught her watching Victoria at one point with an expression he couldn't classify. Not quite sadness, not quite anger, something unresolved sitting behind her eyes that she smoothed over quickly when she noticed him looking. He hadn't thought anything of it at the time. The gala wound down around 11. Guests filtered out in groups, drivers appearing in the circular driveway with practiced efficiency. Logan had arranged his own car for the evening, an Uber Black he'd booked in advance because he didn't drink at these things and didn't want to deal with the parking. He was standing near the main entrance, waiting for the confirmation ping, when Sophia appeared beside him. "Are you leaving?" she asked. "Soon. Car's about 5 minutes out." She nodded slowly, and he noticed she was holding her small clutch with both hands, fingers wrapped tight around it. "I was going to call a car, but mine keeps pushing the arrival time back. Something about event traffic." She paused. "You're going back into the city?" "East Side." "I'm in Midtown." She looked up at him. "Would it be completely imposing to ask if I could share the ride?" Logan glanced at her. She looked, and this was the word that came to him, though he wouldn't have said it aloud. Brittle, like someone holding something heavy and holding it carefully. "Of course," he said, not imposing at all. They made small talk waiting for the car. The kind of conversation that fills silence without asking anything of either person. The driver arrived, a quiet man named Marcus, who kept the radio off and the interior clean, and they settled into the back seat with the comfortable awkwardness of two people who knew each other enough to skip the formalities, but not enough to know quite where to start. They were 15 minutes out from the estate, moving through the dark stretch of highway that preceded the city, when the small talk ran out. Sophia stared out the window for a moment. Then she said, quietly and without looking at him, "Logan, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "How much do you trust Victoria?" He turned to look at her. The highway lights passed overhead in intervals, and in the gaps between them her face was in shadow. "I trust her professionally," he said carefully. "I think she's one of the sharpest people I've ever worked with." "Why?" Sophia was quiet for a long moment. Her fingers tightened on the clutch in her lap. "I've been trying to figure out how to say this for about 3 months," she said finally. "And I don't think there's a good way, so I'm just going to say it." She turned to look at him. Her eyes were steady, but something in them was braced, like a person about to step off a ledge they'd been standing at the edge of for a long time. "There are things happening inside her company and around her personally that you don't know about. Things she's actively worked to keep you from knowing." Logan felt something change in the car, not dramatically, not the way it changes in movies with a soundtrack shift and a close-up, just a subtle recalibration of the air. "What kind of things?" he said. Sophia reached into her clutch and took out her phone. "I need you to see something first," she said. "Before I say anything else, I need you to see it, because I know how this sounds coming from me. And I need you to understand that I'm not doing this because I'm angry at her, or jealous of her, or any of the things she'll probably say when she finds out I told you." "What will she say?" "She'll say I've been unstable, that I've been having a hard time personally, and I've misinterpreted things." Sophia's jaw tightened slightly. She already started laying that groundwork 6 weeks ago. Told 3 different people in her circle that she was worried about me. So when this comes out, there's context for why you shouldn't believe me. Logan looked at her for a moment. "But you're telling me anyway." "Yes." "Why?" She held his gaze. "Because I've watched her do this for 8 months, and I've stayed quiet, and I can't stay quiet anymore. Because you're a good person, and good people don't deserve to be used." She exhaled slowly. "And because I've been lying to myself about what that silence makes me." The phone in her hand had several screenshots pulled up. Text conversations, a long email chain, a transfer record with a set of account numbers he didn't recognize. She handed it to him, and Logan looked down at the screen. He read carefully. His face did not change in any dramatic way. That was his nature. He processed things internally before his expression caught up, but his hand went very still on the phone. The messages were between Victoria and a man named Edward Corrin. Logan knew the name peripherally. Corrin had been a financial advisor connected to Ashford Group's early expansion, someone who'd left under circumstances that had never been fully explained. In the messages, Victoria discussed routing investment capital through a set of holding accounts in a way that specifically obscured the source from the board's quarterly review. The tone between them was intimate and businesslike in equal measure. The tone of 2 people who'd been coordinating for a long time and didn't need to explain things to each other anymore. There was an email between Victoria and Sophia from 4 months earlier. Logan read it twice. In it, Victoria asked Sophia to confirm, if asked, that she had been with Victoria on a specific Saturday evening in March. Victoria had not been with Sophia that evening. That much was clear from the context of the email itself, which laid out a cover scenario with the kind of detail that assumed it would be read by no one other than the 2 of them. "Just tell them we had dinner at Mayfair. I have the reservation records in case anyone checks. Don't elaborate, don't explain, keep it simple." He kept scrolling. There were more. A recording, audio, 3 minutes and 40 seconds, of a phone call between Victoria and someone Sophia had identified in a note as R. Harmon, board member, Western Division. In it, Victoria's voice was smooth and certain, laying out a version of a company decision that contradicted what Logan knew to be the actual series of events, framing it in a way that positioned her as having resisted a failed strategy rather than having championed it. Logan handed the phone back. He looked forward, at the dark highway ahead, at the city lights beginning to appear on the horizon. "How long have you had this?" he said. "The messages I've had for 3 months. The recording." Sophia made that herself at that point. She sent it to me in September. She sent it to you? She started to doubt the arrangement. Sophia's voice was careful. I think she thought I'd help her manage it. I think she forgot, or chose to forget, that managing it is what got me into this position in the first place. Logan was quiet for a moment. The city was getting closer. He could feel it in the quality of the light. You said she started laying groundwork 6 weeks ago. What happened 6 weeks ago? Sophia looked at him. Something shifted in her expression. The briefest flicker of something that wasn't quite surprise but was close to it, like she hadn't expected him to catch that. I told her I wasn't comfortable anymore, Sophia said. With the alibi arrangement, with some of the other things she'd asked me to do, I said I needed to step back. She paused. She received that information very calmly, thanked me for being honest, said she understood completely, and then started telling people you were unstable. Within the week, Logan leaned his head back against the headrest. Outside the window, the city was assembling itself in fragments. Gas stations, overpasses, the lit windows of apartment buildings where people were living ordinary lives that had nothing to do with any of this. She's been doing this a long time, he said. It wasn't really a question. I think it's just how she operates, Sophia said quietly. I don't think she thinks of it as doing anything to people. I think she genuinely believes that managing people is a form of competence. That if you're skilled enough to shape what someone believes about you, that's, I don't know, intelligence, not manipulation. That's a useful thing to believe if you're the one doing the managing. Yes, Sophia said simply. They rode in silence for a while. Marcus kept the car steady and said nothing, the way good drivers do. The lights of the city filled the windows completely now. I want to see everything, Logan said finally. Everything you have, not just what's on the phone. Sophia nodded. I know. She glanced down at her clutch. I have more. At home. I've had it organized for a while, actually. Just in case. She looked at him. I want you to know that this isn't easy for me. She's been my friend for 11 years. Whatever she is, or whatever she's done, 11 years is 11 years. Logan looked at her for the first time since she'd started talking. Really looked at her, the way you look at someone when you're trying to understand not just what they're saying, but what it's costing them to say it. Her eyes were dry. She wasn't performing grief, but there was something exhausted in her face, the look of someone who'd been carrying something heavy for too long and had finally, just now, set it down, and wasn't sure yet whether the relief outweighed the loss. I know it's not easy, he said. She's going to say terrible things about me. Probably. And some people are going to believe her, because she's very good at this. Probably, he said again. Sophia nodded slowly, accepting it. I just needed you to know the truth, she said. Whatever you do with it, that's yours to decide. I just needed someone to know. Logan said nothing for a moment, then, tell me everything, from the beginning. Sophia took a breath. She straightened slightly, and in the moving dark of the car, with the city lights sliding across the windows and Marcus keeping quiet and steady at the wheel, she began. She started 8 months earlier at a dinner meeting Victoria had asked her to attend as a second voice in the room. A man named Garrett Silas had been present, a real estate developer with connections to 3 city council members and a portfolio that overlapped with several of Ashford Group's current projects. The meeting had been listed internally as a strategic partnership discussion. Sophia described it now as something closer to a negotiation about silence. Garrett had something he knew, the specifics of which Sophia was only partially clear on, even now, and Victoria was determining what it would cost to make sure his knowledge remained private. How do you negotiate something like that over dinner? Logan asked. Very politely, Sophia said. You'd be amazed how politely. No one raised their voice. The food was excellent. By the end, Garrett was smiling and Victoria was making a joke about the wine list. She paused. 2 weeks later, Ashford Group made a contribution to a foundation that Garrett's wife chairs, $300,000. Logan absorbed that. And you knew what it was for. I was at the dinner. Why did she bring you? Sophia was quiet for a moment. I think because I'm a familiar face. Someone who makes things feel normal. If it's just Victoria and Garrett, it's a meeting. If Victoria's there with her friend having dinner, it's... She searched for the word. Ambient, less formalized, harder to characterize later. She used you as set dressing. Sophia winced slightly. That's probably the accurate description. She kept going. There were more stories. A supplier negotiation where Victoria had used personal information she shouldn't have had access to. A hiring decision that was presented publicly as merit-based, but had been determined by a factor no one else in the company knew about. A series of conversations with a journalist that had resulted in a story about a competitor being framed in a way that served Ashford Group's interests without any fingerprints visible. None of it was simple. None of it was the kind of thing you could reduce to a single accusation. That was part of what made it effective. Each individual piece, examined in isolation, might be explained away. A charitable donation that could be genuine. A hiring decision that could simply be a preference. A dinner that could be exactly what it appeared to be. Victoria's architecture of deception was built on plausible deniability at every level. But taken together, laid out by someone who had been present for the original conversations, the pattern was unmistakable. Logan listened to all of it. He asked questions when he needed clarification, and he tried to keep his questions precise. Not emotional, not accusatory, just working to understand the shape of what he was being told. It was how he handled difficult information, always had been. Feel it later. Understand it first. It was only when Sophia mentioned, almost as an aside, that Victoria had once described Logan specifically in a conversation, had described his loyalty as something that was easy to sustain because he needs to believe in something bigger than himself, and I give him that Logan felt something turn over in his chest. He was quiet for a long moment after that one. She said that to you? He said eventually. She said it to Edward Corrin, in a message. I saw it when she left her phone unlocked and I happened to see the screen. Sophia's voice was careful. I don't think she would have wanted me to see it, but I did. He nodded. Didn't say anything else. They reached Sophia's building in Midtown at 12:47. She had a second-floor apartment in a converted brownstone, the kind of building that had character without being expensive. She gathered her things and paused with her hand on the door. Do you want to come up? She said. I have the full documents, printed. I put everything together weeks ago. She looked at him steadily. I wasn't sure who I was going to give them to, but I put them together. Logan looked up at the building. The lights in the lobby were on, warm through the glass. Yeah, he said. I do. Her apartment was small and lived in. Bookshelves that had more books than space, a drafting table in the corner covered in papers and sticky notes, a framed print on the kitchen wall that said something in Italian that Logan didn't read. It felt like a place someone actually lived in, as opposed to a place someone had curated to communicate something about themselves. She made coffee without asking if he wanted any, and he didn't object. The folder she pulled from her desk drawer was thick, 2 inches, maybe more, of organized documents, printed emails, annotated transfer records, dates and names written in the margins in careful handwriting. She'd been building this for a long time, longer than 3 months. He could see it in the organization, the color-coded tabs, the way she knew exactly where everything was. He sat at her kitchen table and went through it methodically, one document at a time. She sat across from him and answered questions when he had them, and let him read in silence when he didn't. The coffee was strong and neither of them touched it much. At some point, the clock on the microwave read 2:14 a.m., and Logan sat back and looked at the ceiling. I don't know what I thought I knew about her, he said. He said it to the ceiling more than to Sophia. I knew she was hard. I knew she made decisions that I wouldn't make. But I thought that was... He stopped. Started again. I thought the hardness was separate from the person underneath. I thought there was a line she wouldn't cross. I thought that too, Sophia said. Her voice was quiet. For a long time. What changed your mind? She was quiet for a moment. When she asked me to tell the Garrett alibi, it was the 3rd or 4th time she'd asked me to confirm something, cover something. Each time there was a good reason. Each time I told myself it was a one-time thing. She turned her coffee cup in her hands. And then one night, I was lying awake at 2 in the morning, and I thought, if every time I do this there's a good reason, and the good reasons keep coming, then at what point am I just someone who lies for her? At what point is that what I am? Logan looked at her. The kitchen light was warm and a little unsteady, the way old overhead lights are. "You're not," he said. "I know that now." She met his eyes. "But I had to actually do something to know it. You can't just decide you're a good person. You have to do something that a good person would do." They sat in silence for a little while. Outside, the city made its quiet 2 a.m. noises. A car passing, a distant siren, the ambient hum of a place that never really goes fully to sleep. "I have a daughter," Logan said eventually. Not sure exactly why he said it. "I know," Sophia said. "Macy. Victoria's mentioned her." She paused. "She called her that kid once." Logan said nothing. "I noticed it when she said it," Sophia added. "I didn't say anything. I should have." He looked at the documents spread across her kitchen table, the neat columns of numbers, the names connected by arrows in Sophia's handwriting, the recorded conversation, a printed transcript, highlighted in 3 colors. He thought about 4 years of mornings arriving at that office. 4 years of believing he understood what he was part of. 4 years of taking Macy to school and coming home at night and thinking he was building something with his life. He thought about Victoria saying, in a text message to a man whose name he didn't fully know yet, that Logan's loyalty was easy to sustain because he needed to believe in something bigger than himself. He thought about how correct that was. He thought about how it had been written like a user manual. "I'm going to deal with this," he said finally. The words were quiet and certain, the same way he handled everything, was without drama, with something underneath it that was harder to name. Sophia nodded. She didn't ask what dealing with it meant. She understood it would be complicated and ugly and probably long. She'd had months to understand it. "I'll be a witness," she said. "Whatever you need. I'll testify. I'll hand over everything I have. Her voice caught slightly on the next word and she pressed through it. "Whatever you need." Logan looked at her. "You understand what that's going to cost you?" "Yes." "The people in her circle, the professional connections, the—" "Yes," she said again, quieter this time, but the same word. He nodded slowly. It was nearly 3 in the morning when he stood to leave. Sophia walked him to the door. In the small entrance hallway, under the light from a fixture that was slightly crooked on the wall, they stood for a moment in the specific silence of 2 people who have just shared something that changes the landscape between them permanently. "Thank you," he said. "I know that's inadequate." "It's enough," she said. He took the folder with him. It sat on the passenger seat the whole drive home, solid and specific and real. And Logan drove through the empty city with both hands on the wheel and his mind very, very quiet in the way it goes quiet when something large is settling into its permanent shape. He parked outside his building at 3:45. He sat in the car for a minute before going up. Above him, in a second-floor window, he could see the faint glow of the nightlight he kept on in Macy's room, a small, steady light in the dark. He reached across the seat and picked up the folder, tucked it under his arm, walked inside. He checked on Macy before he did anything else. She was asleep on her back with Gerald the elephant tucked under one arm, her hair splayed out on the pillow in the loose, chaotic way children sleep when nothing is worrying them. Logan stood in the doorway for a long time, just watching her breathe. Then he closed her door softly and went to his kitchen table. He set the folder down. He did not open it again that night. He knew what was in it. He would deal with it in daylight, when he could think clearly, when he could make the decisions that needed to be made without the strange, altered logic of 4 a.m. pressing down on everything. But he sat there for a while, not thinking in any directed way, just sitting with the weight of what the night had handed him. 4 years. He'd given 4 years to something that had never been what he thought it was. The intelligence was real. The competence was real. But the person he'd constructed from those qualities, the person he'd admired and trusted and privately measured himself against, that person had been an architecture, a very good one, built by someone who understood, perhaps better than anyone he'd ever met, that the easiest lies to sustain are the ones that contain a great deal of truth. He sat in his kitchen in the dark of the morning, and he let himself be angry. Not the loud kind. Not the kind with raised voices and thrown objects. The quiet kind that sits in your chest like something with weight and temperature that you know is going to be there for a while before it burns itself out. Then he went to bed. Because Macy would be up at 6:30 and she wanted pancakes, and some things don't stop being true just because everything else has gone complicated and strange. He had a folder on his kitchen table, a woman's voice in his memory, and a truth he hadn't asked for and couldn't give back. He had a long road in front of him, but Logan Pierce had always known how to walk a long road. He'd been doing it alone for years. He woke up 4 hours after he'd gone to bed, which wasn't enough. But Macy was already moving around in her room, and the smell of morning had a way of pulling him vertical, whether he was ready or not. He lay there for 30 seconds, staring at the ceiling, and the events of the previous night settled back into place with the efficiency of something that had been waiting for him to open his eyes. Not a bad dream. Not the residue of too much wine at the gala. A folder on his kitchen table and a woman's voice telling him, carefully and at great personal cost, that he'd been wrong about something fundamental for 4 years. He got up. Macy was already at the kitchen table in her pajamas with a box of cereal she'd retrieved herself, which she wasn't technically supposed to do, but which Logan had stopped fighting because the battles worth fighting with a 7-year-old were finite, and cereal retrieval wasn't one of them. She had Gerald tucked under her arm and was studying the back of the box with the focused attention she brought to everything she found genuinely interesting. "Morning," he said. "It says there's 12 grams of sugar," she said without looking up. "Is that a lot?" "Depends what you're comparing it to." "Compared to a cookie." "Less than a cookie." "Okay." She seemed satisfied with this and poured herself a bowl. Logan moved to the coffee maker and stood there while it ran and looked at the folder on the other end of the table, which Macy had not touched or apparently noticed, and thought about what he needed to do today. He needed to think clearly. He needed to go through everything in that folder again, in daylight, without the strange pressurized feeling of 3 a.m. sitting on his chest. He needed to understand exactly what he was dealing with before he decided what to do with it. After he dropped Macy at school, he came back to the apartment and sat down with the folder and a legal pad and spent 3 hours going through it in a different way than he had the night before. Less reactive, more methodical. He made notes in the margins. He drew a timeline on the legal pad, working backward from the most recent documents to the earliest ones he could date. He tried to build a picture that was accurate rather than emotional, because the emotional picture was available to him at any time and he didn't need to work for it, but the accurate one required effort. What emerged from that effort was something more organized and more deliberate than he'd initially absorbed. The pattern wasn't chaotic. Victoria didn't operate chaotically. That much was consistent with everything he knew about her. What she had constructed, over what appeared to be at minimum 2.5 years, was a layered system of controlled exposure, a way of operating that left no single person with a complete picture. Sophia had seen certain things. Edward Corrin knew certain things. Garrett Silas knew what he knew, which was apparently enough to require management. And Logan, positioned at the center of daily operations, had been given a role designed to keep him credible and useful while ensuring he remained unaware of the architecture around him. He was the legitimate face, the one who actually ran things well, the one whose integrity, if questioned, would reflect positively on the organization and by extension on Victoria. She hadn't hired him despite his principles. She'd hired him partly because of them. That realization was the one that sat worst. It had a quality he hadn't encountered much in his adult life. A kind of retroactive nausea, the sensation of understanding that something you'd felt good about had been understood by someone else entirely differently from the very beginning. He called his brother-in-law Ray that afternoon. Ray was an attorney, not the kind who handled corporate law. He was a family attorney, wills and custody and that kind of work. But he knew people, and more importantly, he knew how to think about legal situations without immediately catastrophizing. Logan trusted him. Ray had been part of his life long before Claire died and had stayed part of it after, which meant something. "I need some advice," Logan said when Ray picked up. "Not family stuff. Something else." "Okay." Ray's voice shifted slightly, recognizing the register Logan was using. "Personal or professional?" "Both, kind of. Do you have an hour?" I have 40 minutes. That enough? Probably. He walked Ray through it. He was careful not to name specific amounts where he wasn't certain, and he framed what he knew as what he knew versus what he'd been told, which was a distinction Ray would care about. Ray listened without interrupting, which was one of his best qualities. When Logan finished, there was a short silence. The documents, Ray said, the printed ones. Who compiled those? The source did, before she came to me, and she's willing to cooperate. She said so, directly. Another silence. Okay. Don't do anything with Victoria yet. Don't confront her. Don't change your behavior at work. Don't give her any indication that you know anything. Can you do that? Yes. I'm going to connect you with someone. Her name is Andrea Marsh. She handles corporate whistleblower cases, and she's very good. I'm going to text her tonight and see if she can see you this week. Is she discreet? She's paranoid about discretion, which is better. He paused. Logan, how are you actually doing with this? The question surprised him, which maybe it shouldn't have. I'm fine, he said, which was the answer he always gave. You trusted her. I know. That's not nothing. I know that too. Ray let that sit for a moment. All right, I'll text you Andrea's contact tonight. Logan hung up and sat for a while in the silence of his apartment, which was specific and daytime empty in a way that apartments with kids in them always are when the kids are gone. Macy's shoes were by the door. Her drawings were on the fridge. Gerald's backup, a smaller stuffed elephant she'd named Gerald too with zero irony, was on the couch. He picked up his phone and sent Sophia a text. Just 3 words. I'm moving forward. Her response came 4 minutes later. I figured you would. Let me know what you need. He stared at those words for a moment. Let me know what you need. He tried to remember the last time someone had said that to him and meant it without qualification. He put the phone face down and went back to his legal pad. The meeting with Andrea Marsh happened 3 days later in her office on the 14th floor of a building downtown that smelled like old carpet and strong coffee and the specific kind of industrious seriousness that accumulates in spaces where difficult things get worked through. Andrea was in her mid-40s, compact and direct, with reading glasses she put on and took off repeatedly without appearing to notice she was doing it. She had the file for 11 minutes before she said anything substantive. How much of this did you personally witness? She asked. Almost none of it, Logan said. I was deliberately excluded. Right. And your source? She glanced at the notes he'd brought. Sophia Bennett. You believe her? Yes. Why? He'd thought about how to answer this before coming. Because she had everything to lose by telling me, and she told me anyway. Because she'd been organizing that documentation for weeks before she said anything to me, which means it wasn't impulsive. And because the things she told me about Victoria's operating style are consistent with things I've observed myself without ever connecting them into a pattern. Andrea nodded slowly, chewing on something. The financial transfers are the most actionable. If these numbers are accurate, she tapped one of the printed pages, you're looking at potential securities violations, depending on how the holding accounts are structured, and whether we can trace the routing. The board concealment angle is significant. She set the paper down. The personal cover story stuff, the alibi requests, the reputation management, that's harder. Harder to quantify, harder to litigate. I understand. You may not be the primary complainant here. Depending on how this unfolds, this could move to regulatory bodies, which means it might not be fully in your control once it starts. I understand that too. She looked at him over the top of her glasses. You seem very calm for someone who's been working with this woman for 4 years. I'm not calm, Logan said. I'm just organized about it. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. All right, she said. Here's what we're going to do. She walked him through it, the steps, the sequencing, what she needed from Sophia, what she needed from him, what the likely responses would be, and in what order. She was methodical in a way that Logan found genuinely steadying, because it meant that someone who knew what she was doing had looked at the situation and found it navigable. Not easy, not clean, but navigable. He called Sophia from the parking garage after the meeting. She wants to meet you. he said when Sophia picked up. When? As soon as possible. She thinks your documentation is solid. A pause on the line. Okay, Sophia said. Then quieter. How was it? Meeting her? She's good. I think she's genuinely good at this. Are you okay? That question again. People kept asking it in a way that suggested the answer was more uncertain than he was letting on. I'm fine, he said, and then, because it was Sophia and she'd earned something more honest than that, I'm better when I'm moving. Standing still with this is harder than dealing with it. I know what you mean, she said. I've been standing still with it for months. He heard something in that, the specific exhaustion of someone who'd been carrying something heavy in a small space for a very long time. You should have told me sooner, he said. He kept his voice even so it wouldn't sound like an accusation. I know. She didn't make excuses for it. I wasn't ready, and I wasn't sure you'd believe me. I believed you. I didn't know that. She paused. I didn't know you well enough to know that. He thought about that as he drove home. He and Sophia had existed in each other's peripheral vision for years, these gala conversations, the occasional overlap at company events Victoria had invited her to, the specific familiarity of two people who have heard enough about each other from a shared source that they feel a connection without having actually built one. But he hadn't known her. Not really. He knew she was warm and direct and that she listened well. He knew she made him slightly more at ease than the rooms they usually met in warranted. He hadn't known she was the kind of person who spent 3 months building a folder of evidence before doing the hard thing and then did the hard thing anyway. That mattered. He wasn't sure what to do with the fact that it mattered, so he set it aside and focused on what was in front of him. The next 2 weeks required a performance Logan found genuinely difficult, going into the office every day and being exactly what he'd always been, professional and capable and steady, with no visible change in how he interacted with Victoria. She had her eyes everywhere, so that much he now understood, and any shift in his behavior would be noticed and analyzed and responded to before he'd had time to do anything strategic about it. Victoria, for her part, seemed entirely unaware that anything had changed. She sent him an email on the Monday after the gala about a logistics review she wanted him to lead. She stopped by his desk on a Wednesday to ask his opinion on a vendor proposal, which he gave honestly and competently because his actual competence wasn't contingent on his feelings about her. She invited him to a small working lunch with 2 board members on a Thursday, and he attended and said the right things and felt the entire time like he was standing at a slight remove from the room he was in, watching himself operate from a few feet away. He was good at compartmentalization. He'd learned it the hard way, after Claire died, when the only alternative to functioning was not functioning, and not functioning wasn't an option with a 2-year-old who needed breakfast. He'd built a wall inside himself between what he was feeling and what needed to happen, and he could operate behind that wall almost indefinitely when he had to. He didn't enjoy it. He didn't think it was entirely healthy, but it worked. He texted Sophia on the Thursday evening after the lunch. She'd met with Andrea 2 days earlier, and Logan had received a brief update that the meeting had gone well and that Andrea was moving to the next phase, whatever that meant in practical terms. How are you holding up? He wrote. He almost deleted it before sending. It felt like too much, or possibly not enough, or something in between that he didn't have vocabulary for. He sent it anyway. Honestly? Weird, she wrote back. I keep reaching for my phone to text Victoria about something dumb and then remembering. He stared at that for a moment. 11 years is a long time, he wrote. Yeah, it's like a breakup except the other person doesn't know it's happened yet. He almost laughed. That's a very accurate description. How are you? Functioning, he wrote. That's not the same as okay. No, he agreed. It's not. There was a longer pause after that. The kind of pause in a text conversation that means someone is deciding whether to push further or let it rest. She let it rest, which he appreciated. Tell Macy I said hi, she wrote finally. You've never met Macy. I know, but tell her anyway. He put the phone down and something shifted in his chest that he didn't examine too closely because there was already enough he was dealing with, and he didn't have the bandwidth for anything additional. It was during the 3rd week that Logan found his own piece of evidence. Something Andrea had not been looking for, that Sophia hadn't mentioned, that emerged from his own access to the company's operational systems in the course of his regular work. He had been reviewing a contract addendum related to a property development partnership when he noticed a discrepancy in the communication chain attached to the file. A loop of internal approvals that should have included the compliance officer's sign-off, but didn't. It was a small absence. Easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. Logan hadn't been looking for it specifically. He was looking at the document for operational reasons and noticed the gap the way you notice when a word is missing from a sentence. The sentence still readable, but slightly wrong. He pulled the broader contract file. He found 2 more gaps of the same kind in different documents, spanning an 18-month period. All 3 related to transactions that fell within a specific dollar range that he realized was just below the threshold that would trigger mandatory board review. He sat at his desk looking at his monitor and let the implications settle. This wasn't Sophia's documentation. This wasn't something anyone had given him. This was something he'd found himself, in files he had legitimate access to in the course of work he was actually supposed to be doing. The significance of that would matter to Andrea. He made copies of the relevant file segments through his personal archiving workflow, which was something he did routinely and legitimately for operational record keeping. He saved them to his personal drive. He emailed Andrea that evening with a message that said only, "I found something additional. Can we meet this week?" She responded within 20 minutes. Thursday, 9 a.m. Don't put details in email. He sat back from his desk and pressed his fingers against his eyes for a moment. In the other room, Macy was watching something on her tablet. He could hear the faint sound of voices, some animated show she was currently obsessed with. The sound was ordinary and specific and grounding in a way that was hard to explain, the way very ordinary things become anchors when larger things are threatening to sweep you somewhere you don't want to go. He went in and sat on the couch next to her, and she climbed into the space beside him without looking away from her show, the way children do when your presence is expected and therefore doesn't require acknowledgement. And Logan put his arm around her and watched an animated walrus explain something about ocean currents, and felt the specific weight of what he was protecting by going through with all of this settle somewhere permanent and clear in his chest. This was why he didn't stop. Not for himself, not for abstract justice, not even entirely for Sophia's sake. Because the world that Macy was going to grow up in was going to be made by the choices that people in positions like his made when they found out things like this. And Logan Pierce was not going to be the man who sat on his hands because it was easier. The Thursday meeting with Andrea was the first one where she let some of her professional composure slip just slightly. Not in a dramatic way, but in the way that competent people reveal enthusiasm when something genuinely compelling lands on their desk. "This," she said, pointing at one of the printed gaps he'd brought her, "this changes the complexity of the filing significantly." She looked up at him. "You understand that your own position may come under scrutiny during this process." "I know." "Your access to these files, your role in the organization, it'll be examined." "I know that too." He met her eyes. "I've done nothing wrong. If someone wants to look at 4 years of my work, they're welcome to. Everything I've done is exactly what it appears to be." She held his gaze for a moment. "I believe you," she said, and said it plainly enough that he believed she meant it. "I'm just making sure you're prepared for that to be unpleasant regardless. I'm not doing this because it's comfortable." She nodded, put her glasses back on. "All right, then we're moving forward." What happened next happened over about 6 weeks, and it happened in the specific way that institutional processes happen, incrementally, paperwork heavy, and punctuated by periods of silence that were more stressful than the active moments. Andrea filed with the relevant regulatory body. A preliminary review was initiated. Certain documents were formally requested. Logan received legal notification that he was a cooperating witness in an ongoing inquiry, which meant that his role at Ashford Group became effectively untenable regardless of how the inquiry resolved. He told Victoria before she found out through other channels. He thought she deserved that, and he thought he deserved to be the one to say it to her face. They met in her office at the end of a Tuesday, after everyone else had gone. The view from her office window was the same view it had always been. The city in its early evening state, lights coming on in the towers across the skyline. He'd always liked that view. He'd spent a lot of hours across from it. She was behind her desk when he came in, working, and she looked up and something passed across her face when she registered his expression. Not alarm, not yet, but a sharpened attention, the look of someone who reads rooms professionally and has just read something they weren't expecting. "Close the door," she said. He closed it. He didn't sit down. "I'm cooperating with a regulatory inquiry into Ashford Group's financial practices," he said. "I wanted you to hear that from me." Victoria was very still, the kind of stillness that isn't peace. "Who else have you spoken to?" she said. Her voice was even. "An attorney. The appropriate regulatory body." He paused. "I'm not here to negotiate, Victoria. I'm here because I thought you deserved to know before it was official." She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes that wasn't quite emotion and wasn't quite calculation, the place between them where both lived. "This is Sophia," she said. It wasn't a question. "Sophia came to me, yes." "Logan?" She leaned forward slightly. Her voice shifted into something warmer, more intimate, the frequency she used when she wanted someone to feel like she was letting them inside something. "Sophia has been struggling. I've been genuinely concerned about her. Some of what she may have shown you, she's been under tremendous personal pressure, and her interpretation of certain events is—" "Stop," he said. She stopped. "I know what you're going to say," Logan told her. "I know you've been building that narrative for 6 weeks. I know about the conversations you've had. I know about Garrett Silas. I know about the compliance gaps. I know about the holding accounts, and I know about Edward Corrin." He kept his voice level. "I'm not here because Sophia told me things, and I believed her naively. I'm here because I did the work. I read everything. I found things she didn't even give me." Victoria's expression didn't collapse. It wasn't like that with her. Things didn't collapse visibly. But something rearranged itself behind her face, a subtle shift in the architecture, like a building that has just been told it's going to be demolished and is adjusting to this information. "You've thought about what this does to the company," she said. "The people who work here. They'll be affected." "You should have thought about them," Logan said quietly. "When you had the chance." She looked at him, really looked at him, in a way she hadn't in a long time, maybe in a way she'd never quite done before. Without the filter of use, without calculating what he was for, just looking at him as a person standing in her office at the end of a Tuesday evening who had decided that truth mattered more than comfort. "You could walk away," she said. "You could leave, take a settlement, let the regulatory process run without your cooperation. You'd still land well. Your reputation is clean. You could protect it." "I know." "Then why are you doing this?" He thought about Macy on the couch watching the animated walrus. He thought about Sophia at her kitchen table at 2 a.m., turning a coffee cup in her hands, saying I had to do something that a good person would do. He thought about Claire, who would have known immediately what the right thing was, and would have been puzzled that it required this much deliberation. "Because someone who did the right thing took a significant risk to tell me the truth," he said, "and I'm not going to make that a waste." Victoria absorbed that. She looked, for just a moment, like she was going to say something that wasn't strategic, something real, underneath all the layers. He saw the impulse cross her face. Then it closed again. The professional surface came back up, smooth and certain, and she said, "You should speak to my attorneys before you go any further." Logan looked at her for a moment longer. He felt the specific sadness of standing in front of someone and understanding that you are never going to reach them. Not because they can't be reached, but because they've decided long ago that being reached is a vulnerability they can't afford. "Goodbye, Victoria," he said. He left her office. He walked down the hall that he'd walked down 1,000 times, past the desks where people he'd worked alongside for years would tomorrow begin to understand that their world was about to change, through the lobby with its glass doors and its security desk, where a man named Phil, who watched football and had a daughter the same age as Macy, told him to have a good night. "You too, Phil," Logan said. He pushed through the doors into the evening air. The city was doing what it always did, indifferent and enormous and proceeding with its business. A cab went by. 2 women were arguing cheerfully about something on the corner. Somewhere nearby, someone was playing music out of a window. something with a horn section that drifted out over the street and dissolved. Logan stood on the sidewalk for a minute and breathed. His phone was in his pocket. He thought about calling Sophia and then thought he'd wait until he was somewhere he could sit down and talk properly, not standing outside Victoria's building in the early evening with his stomach feeling like the inside of a weather system. He had no job to go back to. He had a folder of documented evidence and an attorney and a 7-year-old who wanted to be a marine biologist or a pancake professional and had strong opinions about cereal sugar content. He had a modest apartment and some savings that would buy him a few months if he was careful. He had a name for himself that was clean. Whatever happened next. He had Sophia, who had risked everything she had to hand him the truth in the back of a car on a dark highway, and who texted him about small things between the large ones, and who had asked him to tell his daughter hello even though they'd never met. He didn't know what any of that added up to yet. He understood that the next part of this was going to be harder than what had already happened, and that harder meant longer and more complicated and more expensive in every sense of the word, and that the version of his life he was about to enter looked nothing like the one he'd had last month. He started walking toward the parking garage. The horn music from the window followed him for half a block, and then disappeared into the general noise of the city, and Logan Pierce walked forward into whatever was coming with his hands steady and his eyes open, and the particular quiet courage of a man who has decided that some things matter more than the cost of standing up for them. He didn't know how long the road was from here. He knew he was going to walk it anyway. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. That was the thing about institutional consequences. They moved like weather systems, slow and pressurized, building at the edges before the center gave way. Logan had expected the immediate aftermath of his conversation with Victoria to feel like something decisive, a door closing with finality. Instead, the days that followed felt like standing in the space between lightning and thunder, knowing the sound was coming and not knowing exactly when. He gave his formal resignation the morning after the conversation in her office. HR received it with the specific practice neutrality of people who have been trained to absorb information without reacting to it. His direct report acknowledged it by email within the hour. By afternoon, he'd heard through a former colleague that Victoria had called an emergency senior staff meeting, the ostensible subject of which was a strategic transition in operations leadership, which was accurate technically in the way that all the best misdirections are accurate technically. He cleaned out his desk on a Wednesday. Phil at the security desk shook his hand and said he'd miss seeing him around, and Logan believed him, which was more than he could say for most of the goodbyes that happened that week. A few colleagues stopped by his desk in the hour he had to gather his things. Some genuinely warm, some performing warmth while watching him with eyes that were calculating what his departure meant for their own positions. He didn't fault them for it. Institutional loyalty is always partly self-interest. He'd understood that even before he'd understood everything else. He carried a single cardboard box to his car. It held a framed photo of Macy from last Christmas, a coffee mug she'd painted at one of those pottery places with kids' handprints on it, a small cactus he'd kept on his desk for 3 years because it required almost nothing from him, and a desk calendar that he hadn't needed since everything went digital but had kept because Claire had given it to him, and he was sentimental about specific objects in a way he wasn't about most things. He sat in his car in the parking garage for a moment with the box on the passenger seat and looked at it. 4 years in a cardboard box. It wasn't a sad thought exactly. It was just a true one. His phone buzzed. Sophia. How did it go? Done, he wrote back. Drove out of the parking garage about 5 minutes ago. Are you okay? He looked at the box, at the handprint mug, at the cactus that had survived 4 years on minimal sunlight and infrequent watering and whatever ambient care it absorbed from being in the same room as a human who didn't actively neglect it. I think so, he wrote. Ask me again in a week. The week was harder than he'd anticipated, which surprised him because he'd anticipated it being fairly hard. It wasn't the job loss itself. He had savings, he had references, he had a clean professional record that any competent employer would recognize as clean. It was the disorientation of suddenly having no structure after 4 years in which the structure had been extremely reliable. He'd built his life around certain rhythms: the school drop-off, the commute, the day, the commute back, the dinner, the evening routine, and now half of that architecture was gone, and he had to rebuild it from nothing in the middle of everything else. He enrolled Macy in an after-school program 2 extra days a week, so he'd have time for meetings with Andrea and the increasingly complex logistics of the regulatory process. Macy accepted this with the adaptability that children have when they've always understood at some wordless level that their parents' world contains things larger than them that sometimes require attention. She asked once where Logan was going on the days he dropped her early, and he said he had some meetings about work, and she said okay, and went back to whatever she was doing, and Logan stood for a moment watching her and felt the particular mixture of gratitude and protectiveness that had been the defining emotional texture of his life since she was born. He didn't tell her anything about what was happening. She was 7. There would be time for real conversations when she was old enough to understand what the real conversation was. For now, the important thing was that her life felt stable, felt continuous, felt like the same life it had always been, even as everything around it shifted. Andrea called him on a Friday morning 3 weeks into the process. He was at his kitchen table with coffee and the legal pad that had become his primary organizational tool, a running list of dates and action items and questions to follow up on. "The preliminary review has escalated," she said without preamble. "They've opened a formal investigation. This is the step we expected." "Okay," Logan said. He wrote formal investigation on the legal pad. "It also means that their attorneys are going to move aggressively to characterize the evidence as compromised. They'll argue that Sophia had personal motives, that you had professional grievances, that the documents were obtained improperly. They're going to try to make the process about the people who brought the complaint rather than the substance of the complaint. We knew they'd do that. Knowing it and experiencing it are different things. I want you prepared for how personal it may get." She paused. Victoria's PR team has already begun placing stories. There's a piece in a business publication this morning framing this as a disgruntled former employee situation. They don't name you specifically, but the description is accurate enough that anyone in your professional network will know who they mean. Logan was quiet for a moment. He'd known this was coming. He told himself he was prepared for it. He discovered now, with it actually in front of him, that prepared was a more theoretical state than actual. "Send me the link," he said. "You sure you want to read it? I need to know what I'm dealing with." She sent it. He read it. He set his phone down and looked at the kitchen wall for a little while. The piece was careful, not libelous, not specific enough to be actionable, but clearly constructed to plant particular impressions in the minds of people who would read it. It described a pattern of internal disruption connected to recent personnel changes at Ashford Group and attributed the company's current difficulties to coordinated reputational attacks by former associates with personal axes to grind. There was a quote from an unnamed source describing the cooperation with investigators as motivated by professional jealousy and personal grievance rather than any genuine concern. Victoria was quoted directly, briefly, in one paragraph. She described herself as committed to full transparency and expressed confidence in the company's legal and ethical standing. She said she was saddened by the actions of people she had trusted and supported. The word saddened was doing a specific kind of work that Logan recognized. He called Sophia. "I've seen it," she said before he could start. Her voice was controlled but tight at the edges, the way voices get when someone has been sitting with something difficult for a little while before the phone rang. "You okay?" "I've had 3 people in my professional network send me the article this morning. 2 of them with messages that were supportive, 1 with a message that was not." A pause. "She's fast. I'll give her that. She's very fast. Andrea said it'll get worse before it gets better." "I know." Sophia was quiet for a moment. "One of the people who sent it, someone I've worked with for 4 years. She sent it with a note that said she hoped I was doing okay, but the way she phrased it was the way people phrase things when they're not sure you're the one who's right." Another pause. "That's the part that's hard. It's not the people who believe her. It's the people who aren't sure." "They'll stop not being sure," Logan said, "when the evidence becomes public." I know that." She breathed out slowly. "I just didn't expect it to feel like this." "How does it feel?" A short silence. Then, "Like being the one who said the emperor has no clothes. Everyone can see it's true, but for a minute there, they all look at you like you're the problem." Logan thought about that. He understood it in an abstract way. He wasn't experiencing it quite the way she was. His professional network was more insular, his social life less integrated with Victoria's world. He didn't have 11 years of friendship dissolving in real time. He had a folder and an attorney and a cactus and a handprint mug and a daughter who wanted pancakes on Saturday mornings. "Sophia," he said, "what you did was right. I need you to hold on to that." "I know it was right. I know you know. But knowing and feeling are different things. You said something like that to me once." A brief silence, then something that was almost a laugh. "Yeah," she said. "I did say that." Another pause. "Thank you." "Don't thank me." "I'm going to anyway." The formal investigation brought with it a machinery that Logan had no real prior experience with and which operated according to rhythms and protocols that were entirely its own. Depositions were scheduled, documents were formally requested and formally produced. Attorneys filed responses to attorneys. Andrea explained each development in language that was clear without being oversimplified, and Logan found that his ability to track the process helped. The understanding made him feel less like a subject of events and more like an active participant in them, which was the only way he knew how to exist in difficult situations. Victoria's legal team was formidable. He'd known it would be. They deployed resources with the efficiency of people who had handled crisis management before and knew exactly which levers to pull and in which sequence. They filed motions challenging the admissibility of specific documents. They submitted declarations from board members and senior executives expressing confidence in the company's integrity. They arranged for a forensic accounting firm to produce a preliminary report that, when examined closely, didn't actually contradict the investigators' findings, but was designed to create a public impression of having done so. Logan spent a Saturday morning in his apartment reading through a 60-page document his attorney had forwarded him. A formal response to the regulatory filing, dense with legal language and strategic framing. He read it with the same methodical attention he'd brought to the original evidence folder, making notes, flagging specific claims. Macy was at his mother's for the weekend, the first overnight she'd done in a few months, and the apartment was very quiet in the specific way it was only quiet when she wasn't in it. His phone rang at 11:30. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. "Logan Pierce." The voice was male, careful, professional in the practiced way of people who make calls like this regularly. "Yes. My name is Dennis Hale. I represent Victoria Ashford personally, separate from Ashford Group's general counsel. I'm calling because Ms. Ashford asked me to reach out regarding a potential resolution." Logan was quiet for a moment. He was standing in his kitchen. The cactus was on the windowsill because he'd taken it home from the office box. It looked fine, which was reassuring. "A resolution," he said. "Ms. Ashford is prepared to discuss a settlement arrangement that would include a confidentiality agreement, a substantial financial component, and a mutually agreed-upon characterization of your departure from the company that would support your professional transition going forward." Logan thought about what Victoria had said in her office. You could protect yourself, you could walk away, you could take a settlement. She'd been planting the seed then. She was watering it now. "Tell me something," Logan said. "Is Ms. Ashford present for this call?" A brief pause. "No." "Then tell me something you'll actually tell her." "I'm not interested in a settlement. I'm not interested in confidentiality. I'm interested in the process completing correctly. If Ms. Ashford would like to speak with me directly, she can contact Andrea Marsh." He paused. "Have a good weekend, Mr. Hale." He hung up. He stood in the quiet kitchen for a moment. Then he called Andrea and left her a voicemail describing the call in detail, which she'd want. Then he called Sophia. "She tried to buy me out," he said when she picked up. He heard the pause. "How much?" He didn't name a number. "I didn't let it get that far." Another pause. "Logan?" Her voice was careful. "I need to ask you something directly." "Go ahead." "Is there any part of you that wishes you'd taken it, or that you'd never gotten into this in the first place?" She was asking it genuinely, not as a test. "I need to know if you're okay with where this is going, because if you're not, if this is costing you more than you expected, I need to know that." He leaned against the kitchen counter, Outside his window, someone on the street below was arguing mildly with a parking meter in the specific annoyed way New Yorkers argue with inanimate objects, fully committed but without expectation of resolution. "No," he said. "No, to which part?" "No to all of it. I don't wish I'd taken it. I don't wish I'd stayed ignorant." He watched the parking meter argument reach its conclusion, which involved the man shaking his head and walking away. "I wish it was cleaner. I wish you hadn't had to carry it alone for as long as you did. I wish a lot of the circumstances were different." He paused. "But not the choice. Never the choice." Sophia was quiet for a moment. Quiet. When she spoke, her voice had changed slightly. Not softer exactly, but less armored. "Okay," she said. "How are you doing? Really?" "Really?" She seemed to consider the question honestly. "I'm sleeping badly. I'm working too much because it gives me something to focus on. I cried in my car last week for about 10 minutes and then felt better, which was alarming and also kind of necessary." A pause. "I'm okay. I'm not great, but I'm okay." "You could come over sometime," Logan said. He said it before he'd fully decided to, the way certain true things come out before your more cautious self can manage them. "For dinner. You could meet Macy. She'd probably ask you a lot of questions about the ocean because that's where she is right now, marine biology, and she doesn't get to talk about it with many people who are actually willing to engage." A beat of silence. "Are you good at ocean questions?" she said. "Terrible. I know almost nothing about the ocean." "I know a little," she said. "I grew up near the coast." Another pause, smaller this time. "Yeah, I'd like that." She came on a Thursday evening, which was one of the nights Macy didn't have the after-school program and was home and vibrating with the specific energy of a child who has been informed that a guest is coming and has decided to prepare. She'd arranged Gerald and Gerald too on the couch in what she described as a welcoming display, and had drawn a picture at school that she decided to give to Sophia because, as she explained to Logan with absolute seriousness, she seems like someone who would like a drawing. Logan had made pasta, which he was reliably competent at, and had decided against trying to be anything more ambitious because ambition in cooking, in his experience, produced impressive failures more often than impressive successes. When Sophia knocked and he opened the door, he noticed two things. First, that she looked different than she did in the context of galas and offices. In jeans and a dark sweater, hair loose and only partially tamed, she looked more like herself than she usually appeared in the places he'd known her from. And second, that she was holding a small paper bag from a bakery 2 blocks from her apartment that she must have gone out of her way to pick up. "Croissants," she said, holding up the bag. "For breakfast tomorrow. I didn't know what else to bring." "You didn't have to bring anything." "I know. I wanted to." She stepped inside and immediately Macy materialized from the direction of the couch, with the energy of a small person who has been waiting at controlled intensity. "Are you Sophia?" Macy demanded. "I am," Sophia said. She looked down at Macy with the specific attention she gave to things she found genuinely interesting. "You must be Macy." "Dad said you don't know anything about the ocean." "He's right, but I know some things." "What do you know?" This was the correct response. Macy launched into what appeared to be a prepared presentation on bioluminescence, which she'd learned about from a video and which had become her current primary interest within marine biology, and Sophia listened with her whole body in the way that Logan had always found disarming about her, turned toward Macy, actually engaged, asking a question at exactly the moment a question would make the conversation better. Logan stood in his kitchen, listening to them talk, and felt something shift in the room's temperature that he wouldn't have been able to describe to anyone, but that he felt clearly and unmistakably. Dinner was easy in a way that surprised him. Not the careful ease of people working at being comfortable, but the actual kind, the kind that doesn't require maintenance. Macy ate her pasta and told Sophia that Gerald too was named Gerald too because he was the second Gerald, and that was just logical. And Sophia agreed that it was very logical, and Logan watched his daughter hold a conversation with this woman who'd risked everything she had to tell him the truth and thought about the strange particular ways that things turn out. After Macy was in bed and the dishes were mostly done, they sat at the kitchen table with wine Logan had opened. a bottle he'd been keeping for a while without particular occasion, which this felt approximately like, and the apartment was quiet in the comfortable way it is when a child is asleep in the next room. "She's wonderful," Sophia said. "She's a lot," Logan said, in the best way. "She's going to ask me about bioluminescence every time she sees me now. I can feel it." "Probably." A comfortable pause. Outside, the city hummed. "The deposition is next week," Logan said. "I know." She turned the wine glass slowly in her hands. "I've been over everything with Andrea. I know what to expect." A pause. "I keep thinking about what Victoria's attorney is going to ask me." "What do you think he'll ask?" "Something designed to make me look like I was motivated by jealousy, or that I misunderstood what I saw, or that I was a bad friend looking for a way to justify it." She looked up. "All the things that might be true enough to be believable to the wrong person. They're not true." "I know." She met his eyes. "But I can see how someone could construct a version of this where they are. I was her friend for 11 years. I did things for her that I'm not proud of. The fact that I eventually did the right thing doesn't erase the fact that I took a long time to get there." "People take time," Logan said. "That's not a moral failing. That's just how people work." She was quiet for a moment. "You're very generous about that." "I'm realistic about it." She looked at him with an expression that was hard to read, layered in the way people's faces are when they're thinking something they're not sure whether to say. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "Yes." "When I decided to tell you in that car, I didn't know how you'd respond. I'd built up this idea that you would believe me, that you were the right person to tell, that you were someone who would do something with the truth rather than nothing." She paused. "But I didn't actually know that. I was making a bet on who I thought you were. And I was right. But I want you to know that it wasn't certainty. It was a bet." She looked at him steadily. "I need you to know that I wasn't fully in control of that it was partly faith and partly desperation and partly the fact that it was late and I was tired of carrying it." Logan thought about the car, the dark highway, the way she'd been holding her clutch with both hands when she'd asked for the ride. "I know," he said. "I could tell it wasn't easy. I just don't want you to think I was braver than I was." "You were brave enough," he said. "That's the only kind of brave that counts." She looked at him for a moment longer. Something settled in her expression, the way something settles when you've been holding a particular tension for a while and the reason to hold it dissolves. The deposition happened on a Tuesday in a conference room in Andrea's building. Sophia went first. Logan sat in the waiting area for the 2.5 hours she was inside, doing work on his laptop because sitting without doing anything would have been worse. And when she came out, she looked tired but not broken. The specific appearance of someone who has done something difficult and made it through. "How was it?" he asked. "Long," she said. She sat down in the chair across from him, dropping her bag on the floor. Her eyes were slightly red at the edges, not from crying, he thought, but from the sustained concentration of being interrogated carefully by people trying to find gaps in what you know. "Did they try the jealousy angle?" "They tried 4 different versions of it." She leaned her head back. "I answered the same way each time. What I saw, when I saw it, what I understood it to mean. No interpretation beyond the facts, just like Andrea said." She closed her eyes briefly. "They asked me once if I'd ever been in love with Victoria." Logan looked at her. "What did you say?" "I said that was irrelevant to the documents in the filing." She opened her eyes. "They dropped it." His own deposition happened the following week. It lasted 3 hours and 40 minutes. Victoria's attorney was skilled in the particular way of people who've conducted many depositions. Smooth and patient and methodical, with occasional sharp turns designed to catch you misremembering or contradicting yourself. Logan answered every question carefully and completely, and did not volunteer anything beyond what was asked, which Andrea had drilled into him, and when it was over he felt the same hollowed-out steadiness that follows any sustained expenditure of controlled effort. Walking out of the building, he found Sophia waiting on the front steps. He hadn't known she'd be there. She stood when she saw him. She didn't say anything. She just looked at him with her direct, steady attention, letting him arrive back at himself from wherever the deposition had taken him. "You didn't have to come," he said. "I know." She handed him a coffee in a paper cup she'd been holding. "You like it black?" He took it. It was still hot. He had no idea how long she'd been waiting. "How bad was it?" she asked. "Not as bad as I expected." He drank the coffee. "They tried to suggest the compliance gaps I found were ones I'd been aware of and stayed silent about. That's their angle on you." "I know. Andrea prepared me for it." He exhaled slowly. "It doesn't make it feel less like being called something you're not." "No," she said. "It doesn't." They stood on the steps for a moment. The city moved past them. People, cabs, a delivery bike, a woman walking a very large dog with the resigned expression of someone who'd underestimated the breed. "Thank you," he said, "for being here." "You were there through all of mine," she said simply. He looked at her. "This is a strange situation," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "I mean the whole thing. All of it." He turned the coffee cup in his hands. "I keep thinking I should feel worse than I do. Like there's a version of this I should be angrier about, more, I don't know, more destroyed by. And instead I just feel like—" He stopped. "Like what?" He thought about it. "Like I finally know what's real," he said. "About the work. About her. About what I'm actually capable of." He paused. "About what matters." Sophia was quiet, listening. "For 4 years I was building something I thought was mine," he said. "And some of it was. The work I did was real, but the context I thought I was building it in was constructed for me, and I didn't know that." He looked up. "Now I know it. And everything that happens from here is going to be actually mine. No one else's architecture, just mine." She held his gaze for a long moment. "That's a good way to think about it," she said. She meant it. He could tell. Not placating, not performing comfort, just true. He finished the coffee. The cup was warm in his hands and then gone, and they walked down the steps together into the ordinary afternoon, and the city continued being what it always was. Indifferent and loud and full of people living lives that had nothing to do with depositions or regulatory investigations, or the specific particular aftermath of finding out that someone you trusted was a different person than you thought, but also full, Logan understood now, of people who showed up on front steps with hot coffee because they knew you'd need it. That mattered. It mattered in a way that didn't require explanation and didn't require him to examine it too carefully just yet, because there was still a long road ahead and he needed to keep his feet under him. But it mattered. He walked through the afternoon holding that knowledge alongside everything else, and it was the lightest thing he was carrying. The investigation went public on a Thursday morning in November, and Logan found out the way most people find out about things these days, not from the people directly involved, not from official notification, but from a text message. Ray sent it at 7:42 a.m. while Logan was making Macy's lunch, a single link with no accompanying message, which was Ray's way of saying this is significant and I didn't want to bury it in words. Logan set down the knife he'd been using to cut an apple into the specific eighth slices Macy preferred and read the article on his phone with his back against the kitchen counter. The headline was measured, regulatory language rarely made for dramatic headlines, but the substance beneath it was not. The Securities and Exchange Commission had formally announced an investigation into Ashford Group's financial practices, citing evidence of material misrepresentation to the board and potential securities violations related to undisclosed capital routing through offshore holding accounts. The company's stock, which had been trading normally at market open, dropped 11% in the 40 minutes following the announcement. A spokesperson for Ashford Group had issued a statement expressing full cooperation with investigators and confidence in the company's legal standing, which was the statement all companies issued in these circumstances, regardless of their actual confidence level. Victoria was not named personally in the article. That would come later, Logan knew. The regulatory process moved in layers, public disclosure timed to the evidence rather than to the convenience of narrative. But the shape of what was coming was visible enough to anyone paying attention, and the people who needed to be paying attention were paying attention. Macy came into the kitchen in her school clothes with her hair half brushed, the way it always was when she did it herself. and Logan put his phone face down and finished cutting the apple. "Is everything okay?" she asked, with the specific radar that children develop when a parent has been too still for too long. "Yeah, bud, just reading something for work." She accepted this. He handed her the lunch bag and she examined it with the thoroughness of a quality inspector. "Did you put the crackers in?" "The crackers are in. Last time they were the wrong crackers." "These are the right crackers. I checked twice." She seemed satisfied and went to find her backpack, and Logan stood in his kitchen for a moment before picking up his phone and calling Andrea. She'd already seen it. She was already on her third call of the morning when he reached her, and he could hear the specific compressed energy in her voice of someone managing multiple moving pieces simultaneously. "It's earlier than I expected," she said. "Not by much. The story broke before their PR team could get ahead of it, which is better for us." "What happens now?" "Now it accelerates. You'll want to stay very quiet publicly. No statements, no interviews, nothing. Any journalist who reaches out goes directly to me." A pause. "Your name will surface eventually, probably in the next 2 to 3 weeks. There'll be a period where you're identified as a cooperating witness, and Victoria's team will use that window to define the narrative about you before you can. I need you to be prepared for that." "I know." "Oh, are you actually prepared for it? Or are you saying you know because it's the thing to say?" He thought about the deposition, about the coffee on the front steps, about the folder on his kitchen table that had started all of this. "I'm prepared," he said. "Good." She shifted into logistics. There were documents she needed him to review, a timeline she needed to confirm, a secondary interview with investigators that she was scheduling for the following week. Logan wrote everything on the legal pad. When he hung up, the legal pad had 4 more lines of notes, and the kitchen was very quiet, and his apple slices were still on the cutting board, untouched. He ate them standing up. They were good apples. That mattered in a small way that he'd learned over the past several weeks to let matter. He texted Sophia. "It's out." She responded within minutes. "I saw. Are you okay?" "Ask me in a week. You always say that, because it's always true." A pause, then, "I'm coming over tonight if that's okay. I'll bring food. You don't have to cook." He looked at that message for a moment. He thought about saying "you don't have to," which was what he would have said 6 weeks ago. Instead, he wrote, "That's okay. Macy will be happy." She found a new bioluminescence video. Of course she did. The week that followed was the hardest single week of the entire process, and Logan had known it would be difficult, but had not fully anticipated the specific texture of it. It wasn't one large thing. It was many small things happening at irregular intervals, which is its own particular kind of exhausting because you can't prepare for the next one because you don't know when it's coming. His name appeared in a Wall Street Journal follow-up piece on the Wednesday, identified as a cooperating witness and former senior operations coordinator, with a paragraph that characterized his departure from Ashford Group in terms that were technically accurate and contextually misleading. His phone began receiving calls from numbers he didn't recognize. He let them all go to voicemail and forwarded the messages to Andrea, who sorted them into journalists, attorneys representing other parties in the investigation, and one call from a man who claimed to be a former Ashford Group contractor, and who turned out to be, when Andrea looked into it, exactly who he claimed to be, and also someone whose information was useful. A former colleague named Marcus Webb, someone Logan had genuinely liked, had worked alongside for 2 years, had attended 2 company holiday parties with, and had considered something close to a friend, sent him an email that Logan read twice because the first time he wasn't sure he'd understood it correctly. The email expressed concern about Logan's judgment in cooperating with investigators, suggested that he'd been manipulated by Sophia, whose motives Marcus characterized as clearly personal, and ended with a sentence that read, "I hope you've thought about what this does to the people here who had nothing to do with any of it." Logan sat with that email for a while. He understood, on an intellectual level, that Marcus was scared about his own position. He understood that people often direct the energy of their fear at the nearest available target. He understood that none of this was actually about him. He still felt it, not as anger, more as the particular sadness of discovering that someone you'd estimated fairly was worth less than your estimation. It didn't destroy him. He just noted it and moved on, The way you note a step that's shorter than you expected and adjust your stride. He didn't respond to Marcus. Andrea had told him to respond to nothing, and he was good at following advice when the advice was correct. Sophia's name surfaced publicly 2 days after Logan's. A business blog picked up her role as cooperating witness and ran a piece that was nominally factual and structurally designed to raise questions about her relationship with Victoria, her professional motivations, and her credibility. It described her as a longtime confidant of Victoria's who had allegedly grown disillusioned following unspecified personal conflicts. The word allegedly was doing a lot of work. It usually was. She called him after the piece ran. He could tell she'd been crying. Not from the voice itself, she'd controlled that, but from the slightly flattened quality of it. The way voices go when emotion has been compressed into steadiness, and the steadiness is costing something. "I knew it was coming," she said. "I genuinely thought I was ready for it. But reading it is different from knowing it's coming. Seeing your name in a sentence with words like allegedly and reportedly and sources close to the situation." She stopped for a moment. "My mother called me." Logan was quiet, letting her continue at whatever pace she needed. "She wanted to know what was happening. I had to explain it to her, the whole thing." A pause. She was supportive. She was very supportive. But I could hear in her voice this. She was worried about what people would say, about my career. And she tried not to let me hear it, but I did. "She loves you. Fear and love aren't mutually exclusive." "I know." Her voice softened slightly at the edges. "I know that. I just hate that I'm putting her through it." A pause. "I hate that I'm putting myself through it. I keep asking myself if there was a way to do this that was less, if I could have handled it differently, earlier, where it would have been cleaner." "There wasn't," Logan said. "You know that. If you'd come forward before you had everything documented, they'd have buried it." "Yes." "And if you hadn't come forward at all?" A longer pause. "I'd be living with it," she said quietly. "I'd be exactly where I was in September, awake at 2 a.m. asking myself what I was." "Right." He kept his voice steady and direct. "So there was no cleaner way. There was just this way, which is the right way, and it's hard, and that's the whole thing." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I really hate it when you're reasonable." "No, you don't." A sound that was almost a laugh. "No, I don't." He heard her exhale, slow and deliberately, the way someone breathes when they're choosing to release something they've been holding. "Logan," she said. "Yeah. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." "Okay." "How do you do it? Stay steady through all of this?" A pause. "I don't mean it as a compliment. I mean it genuinely. What's holding you together right now? Because I look at you and you're not okay in the sense of fine, but okay in the sense of functional and grounded and forward moving. And I don't understand how, and I need to know if there's something I'm missing." Logan thought about it. He sat in the chair by the window in his apartment and looked at the street below, where a man was trying to parallel park with the specific doomed optimism of someone who has committed to an impossible space. "Macy," he said, "that's most of it. Having to be stable for her means I have to actually be stable, or at least behave like it long enough for it to start being true." He paused. "And the work. Going through the documents, the legal pad, the meetings with Andrea. It gives me something to do with the energy. Sitting with it and doing nothing would be worse. What else?" He watched the parallel parking attempt collapse into defeat, the driver pulling back out and driving away. "You," he said. A silence on the line. "Having someone else who understands what the whole thing actually is," he continued, because he'd started and there wasn't a graceful way to stop. "Someone who's going through it the same way I'm going through it, but differently, because it's different for you, and being able to compare those differences is—" He stopped, started again. "It helps. You help. I don't know if I've said that clearly enough." Another silence, shorter this time. "You haven't," she said. Her voice was different. "But I'm glad you did now." The parallel parking space was empty. Someone else took it immediately, sliding in with the ease of someone who'd been watching the whole struggle and had timed their approach accordingly. Logan watched that too. Victoria's formal response to the investigation came through her personal PR firm, rather than the company's communications team. A distinction that was itself a signal, because it meant she was beginning to separate her individual exposure from the institutional one. The statement was a masterwork of implication. 3 paragraphs that expressed confidence in her integrity, suggested that the investigation had been provoked by disgruntled former associates acting in bad faith, and committed her to full cooperation while making clear that she believed the process would ultimately vindicate her. She did not mention Logan or Sophia by name, but the phrase, "individuals motivated by personal grievance," appeared twice. Logan read it. He noted the construction. He forwarded it to Andrea with a single line. "Saw the statement." Andrea responded, "Expected. No action required on your end. Keep quiet." He kept quiet. This was, in its own way, the hardest discipline of the entire process. He was a man who handled things by doing things, and there were long stretches of this period where the right thing to do was nothing. Just wait. Let the process run. Trust that the architecture of evidence he and Sophia and Andrea had built together was solid enough to hold under pressure. It was solid. He knew it was solid. But knowing something is solid and watching someone try to knock it over are different kinds of knowing. He began looking for work in this period, partly because the savings were moving in the direction savings always move, and partly because productive occupation was essential to his psychological functioning. He updated his resume with Andrea's input, careful language about his departure from Ashford Group that was accurate and strategically framed. He reached out to contacts in his network, the ones he knew were independent of Victoria's orbit, and had 3 preliminary conversations in 2 weeks. 2 were promising. One was genuinely enthusiastic, which he noted with cautious optimism because enthusiasm has a short half-life in professional contexts. The genuinely enthusiastic contact was a man named Carter Blaine, who ran a mid-sized logistics and operations consulting firm and who had known Logan peripherally for years through industry events. Carter had read the public reporting on the Ashford situation, with what he described as the opposite reaction from the one Victoria's team had intended. "The way I read it," Carter said over coffee at a small place near his office, "is that you're someone who found a serious problem, documented it properly, and reported it through the correct channels at significant personal cost. That's not a liability. That's the kind of character I want in someone who has access to the operational guts of my company." Logan looked at him. "Most people aren't reading it that way." "Most people are hedging," Carter said, with the bluntness of a man who'd been running his own business for 15 years and had lost patience for hedging. "I'm not most people." He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. "I'm not offering you anything today. I want to be clear about that. The timing isn't right, and I want to see how the investigation resolves. But I wanted you to know that when the timing is right, I'm interested in having this conversation seriously." Logan nodded. "I appreciate that." "Don't thank me yet. I'll probably work you harder than Ashford did." He said it without apology. "But you'll know exactly what you're working for." Logan walked back to his car from that meeting with something he hadn't felt in a while. Not hope exactly, because hope in his experience was too fragile a word for anything real. More like the sense of ground underfoot, the feeling that the landscape ahead, while still unmapped, was not without footing. He was in the parking lot when his phone rang. Sophia. "I just had a conversation with my attorney," she said. There was something different in her voice, not tight, not careful, but present in a specific way, like someone standing at the edge of something. "What happened?" "The investigators want to expand my deposition. They have additional documents they want me to respond to. Apparently some of the financial records connect to a pattern that's larger than what we originally gave them." A pause. "There's a second person, someone inside Ashford Group's accounting division who's been cooperating separately. They have things that corroborate what I gave them, from the inside." Logan stood in the parking lot. A car went by. A woman walked past with a stroller, absorbed in her phone. "That's good," he said. "Isn't it?" "Yes, it makes the whole thing more solid. It means I'm not the only inside voice." Another pause, shorter. "It also means it's bigger than I thought. What she was doing, the scale of it. I knew some of it, but this is..." She stopped. "She moved a lot of money, Logan, over a long time, and she kept all of it invisible." Logan thought about the woman in the penthouse office with the city view. The smile calibrated to the precise temperature required for each situation. The way she'd looked at him across the conference table for the first time and said, "We'll see," with that deliberate pause, and how he'd thought it was an invitation to prove himself and how it had actually been an assessment of what he was useful for. "How are you feeling about the expanded deposition?" he asked. "Nervous," she said, without the usual qualification attached to it. Just the word, plain. "I'm nervous. It's going to be long and they're going to push hard, and I know I can do it, but I'm still nervous." "You've done it once already." "I know, but this one feels bigger because now I actually understand how big it is." "Sophia," he kept his voice steady and direct, "you've been ready for this since before you got in my car on that highway. You didn't know it, but you were. You'd been building that folder for months. You already knew what you knew. The deposition is just saying out loud what you already know." A pause. He heard her breathing slow slightly. "You're doing that thing again," she said. "What thing?" "The thing where you're unreasonably calm and it actually helps." "I'm not unreasonably calm. I'm appropriately calm given the situation. From the outside, it looks unreasonable." "Then that's a perspective problem," he said, and she laughed. A real one, short and unguarded, the kind that happens before you've decided to have it. "I'll be fine," she said after the laugh settled. "I know you will." "Tell me something normal," she said. "Tell me what Macy's doing." He looked around the parking lot. An older man was struggling with a parking ticket machine. A pigeon was investigating a dropped French fry with tremendous professional focus. "She's decided that Gerald too needs a friend," Logan said. "So now we need to go to the toy store this weekend to find Gerald 3. "She's naming him Gerald 3? She said consistency is important. Another laugh, longer this time. "I want to come to the toy store." "You're welcome at the toy store." "I'm serious." "So am I." He watched the pigeon claim the French fry and depart with it. "Saturday at 11. We'll find Gerald 3 together." The toy store trip happened on a Saturday that was cold the way November gets when it means it. The kind of cold that makes the city look cleaner and sharper, everything in higher contrast. Macy walked between them through the aisles with the focused energy of someone on a mission, examining stuffed animals with criteria that she hadn't fully articulated but applied consistently. She rejected 2 elephants as not right without being able to explain why before finding a third one, slightly smaller than Gerald and Gerald 2, with ears that were, in Macy's judgment, exactly correct. "Gerald 3, she announced, holding it up. "Gerald 3, Sophia confirmed seriously. "Good ears." "That's what I said," Macy said, pleased. They got hot chocolate from a place near the store afterward. Macy held Gerald 3 and narrated his origin story to Sophia, who listened with complete sincerity and contributed world-building details when asked. Logan sat across from them and drank his hot chocolate and watched and thought about how strange it was that this small, ordinary Saturday, this toy store and this hot chocolate and this woman listening to his daughter construct a mythology for a stuffed elephant was part of the same period of time as regulatory investigations and depositions and attorneys and dismantled trust. How the large, hard things and the small, good things don't take turns. How they coexist, always, whether you want them to or not. Sophia caught him watching and raised an eyebrow. "What?" He shook his head. "Nothing," and meant it in the way that nothing sometimes means everything that can't be said in a crowded hot chocolate place with a 7-year-old narrating elephant mythology 3 feet away. The second deposition took 4 hours. Logan waited again in Andrea's building, this time with a book he barely read. When Sophia came out, she looked wrung out in the way of someone who has been completely honest for a very long time and has nothing left to edit or protect. She sat next to him in the waiting area and didn't speak for a minute, and he let her have the minute. "They have everything," she said finally. "They have things I didn't even know they had. The second cooperating witness gave them internal records I never saw." She stared at the middle distance. "Logan, she was doing this for at least 5 years, maybe longer. I was present for maybe a year and a half of it, and I thought I understood the scope. I didn't, not even close. Does that change anything for you?" She thought about it honestly. "It makes me angrier," she said, "which I didn't think I had room for. I thought I'd processed the anger already. She looked at her hands. I keep thinking about all the times I sat across from her, and she looked at me like I was her friend. And I believed that she believed it, that she was capable of genuinely caring about me and simultaneously treating the people around her like a system to be managed. She paused. That's the part I keep getting stuck on, that both things can be true about a person. They can, Logan said. That doesn't make the harm less real. No. She looked up at him. It just makes it more complicated to hate her. You don't have to hate her. I know. Her voice was tired but clear. I'm not sure I do. I think I'm mostly just done with her, like a door that's been closed. She looked at him. Does that make sense? Yes, he said. That's exactly what it feels like. They walked out into the November afternoon together. The cold came at them immediately, sharp and clean, the kind of cold that wakes you up without asking permission. They walked without particular destination for half a block, and then Sophia said, Can we go somewhere warm? I don't want to go home yet. There's a place 2 blocks from here, he said. Good coffee. Nobody's in a hurry. Perfect. They walked there. The city moved around them, people with their own errands, their own weight, their own versions of the large, hard things, and the small, good things coexisting without asking permission. Logan and Sophia walked through all of it, 2 people who had come to know each other through the specific and unlikely means of shared truth-telling, who had sat on opposite sides of a kitchen table at 2 a.m. and looked at what the world actually was and chosen, both of them, to do something about it. The coffee place was small and warm, exactly as described. They found a table near the window and ordered and sat across from each other with the specific ease of people who have moved past the stage where silence requires management. Outside, November was being November, cold and clear and indifferent. Logan, she said. Yeah. She was looking at the table, at her coffee cup, at something between them that didn't have a name yet but that both of them could see. When she looked up, her eyes were steady and direct and completely unguarded in a way they'd been moving toward for weeks. I need to say something, she said, and I need you to let me finish it before you respond. He nodded. When I got in your car that night, I told myself I was doing it because it was the right thing. And that was true. But it wasn't the whole truth. She held his gaze. I also did it because I'd watched you for 4 years be exactly the person you actually are. Decent and steady and real, in a room full of people who were performing versions of those things. And I didn't want to be someone who let a person like that be misled. A pause. That's still the truth. But there's more of it now. There's a lot more of it. Logan looked at her. The coffee shop was warm and slightly too loud and entirely ordinary, and across from him sat a woman who had risked everything she had to hand him the truth, who showed up on front steps with hot coffee, who listened to bioluminescence presentations with her whole body, who said, I'm nervous without a qualifier attached. I know, he said, because he did know. He'd known for a while. He just hadn't known if the timing was something he was allowed to think about yet, given everything that was still unresolved and complicated and in motion. There's still a lot happening, she said. I'm not asking for anything. I'm just saying it so it's said, so it's not this thing we're both aware of and neither of us says. I know, he said again. And then, because she'd said it so it was said, and that was the kind of courage he recognized and respected. I know, because I feel the same way. And I haven't said it because I didn't want to add anything to what you're already carrying. She looked at him. Something in her expression opened up. Not dramatically, not the way it happens in movies, just quietly and clearly, the way a window opens to let in air. I'm carrying it fine, she said. I know you are. He looked at her steadily. You carry everything fine. That's been clear from the beginning. She looked down at her coffee for a moment. When she looked back up, the corner of her mouth had moved in a way that was not quite a smile and was more than one. So what do we do with that? She asked. Nothing yet, he said. We let the process finish. We let everything that needs to resolve actually resolve. He paused. And then we figure out what comes next from a place that's actually clear. Not in the middle of all of this. She considered it. That's very sensible, she said. I'm a sensible person. "You're a frustratingly sensible person," she said, and this time it was a smile, clear and genuine, and he held on to it the way you hold on to things that matter when the moment makes it available. They drank their coffee. The November afternoon moved outside the window. Between them, something that had been taking shape for weeks sat quietly and without urgency, patient and real, willing to wait for the space it deserved. Logan held his cup and let it sit and did not try to resolve it before it was ready to be resolved, because he'd learned by now that some things couldn't be rushed and didn't need to be, that the right things had a way of arriving in their own time if you kept moving in the right direction. He was still moving. That was enough. The resolution, when it finally came, didn't arrive with fanfare. That was the thing about institutional processes. They ended the way they began, in paperwork and formal language, and the specific anticlimactic machinery of official conclusions. Logan had half expected to feel something seismic when it happened. What he felt instead was quieter than that, and in some ways more permanent. It was a Tuesday in late March, 7 months after the night on the highway, when Andrea called him at 9 in the morning with a voice that had shed its usual compressed efficiency and become something closer to human. "It's done," she said. "The SEC has reached a formal settlement with Ashford Group. Victoria Ashford has agreed to step down from her position as CEO, surrender her board voting rights, and pay a civil penalty of $4.2 million. She's also subject to a 10-year bar from serving as an officer or director of any publicly traded company." A pause. "She did not admit wrongdoing. That's standard. But the consent decree is public, and the terms speak for themselves." Logan was standing in his kitchen. The cactus was on the windowsill. The legal pad was on the table with 7 months of notes on it, pages dense with dates and names and action items, most of them crossed out now. "And the company?" he said. "Survives. The board implemented new oversight structures as part of the settlement terms. Some senior staff changes. It's a different place than it was." Another pause. "Edward Corrin faces separate criminal referral. That process will run independently. Garrett Silas reached a civil resolution 6 weeks ago. You probably saw that." "I saw it." "Logan." Her voice shifted into something she didn't use often. Not professional, just direct. "You did a hard thing correctly. That's rarer than it should be." He looked at the legal pad. 7 months of doing something difficult and trying to do it right. "So did Sophia," he said. "Yes, she did." A pause. "I'll send you the formal documentation this afternoon. You'll want to keep copies." She paused once more. "Go do something that isn't this today. You've earned it." He hung up. He stood in the kitchen for a while without doing anything in particular. The morning light came through the window at the angle it came through in late March, different from the November angle, softer and more horizontal, the kind of light that carries the information that the season has changed without making a statement about it. He called Sophia. She picked up on the second ring. "I know," she said. Her voice was thick in a way that surprised him, and then didn't surprise him because Sophia's emotional responses were always more immediate than his, less filtered, and she felt things at the speed they arrived rather than the speed she decided to let them in. "You already talked to Andrea?" "She called me right after you." A pause. He heard her exhale slowly. "It's over. It's over." A longer silence. Not uncomfortable. The kind of silence between two people who have been through something together and don't need to fill the space with words to confirm that the other person is there. "How do you feel?" she asked. He thought about it honestly. "Like a long noise just stopped," he said, "and I'm standing in the quiet trying to figure out what sounds like normal." She made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and something else. "That's exactly it," she said. "That's exactly what it feels like." Another pause. "Are you okay?" "I think I actually am," he said. And he meant it in a different way than he'd meant it in all the previous months when he'd said it. Not the functional version, not the "I'm stable enough to continue" version, but something more settled and more honest than that. "Me too," she said quietly. "I think I actually am too." They made plans to see each other that evening. He said he'd cook something real, not just pasta, and she said she didn't care what he cooked as long as there was enough of it, and he said he'd make sure. And there was an ease to the exchange that had been building for months and had nowhere to hide anymore now that the urgency of everything else had lifted. He picked Macy up from school that afternoon and told her, in the parking lot with the engine running and a line of other parents' cars behind them, that some things that had been complicated for a while were going to be simpler now. She looked at him with the specific expression she had when she was deciding whether a piece of information was worth pursuing. "Is it about the work stuff?" she asked. "Yeah." "Is it better now?" "Yeah, bud, it's better." She seemed to consider this at the level of its actual importance to her immediate life, which was not high, and said, "Is Sophia coming over?" "Tonight, yeah." "Good," she said, and turned to look out the window, apparently satisfied, and Logan pulled out of the parking lot and thought about how children are sometimes smarter about what matters than they're given credit for. Sophia arrived at 6:30 with a bottle of wine she'd clearly put actual thought into and a slightly windswept look from the walk from the subway. She came in and hugged Macy first, which had become the established order of things over the past few months, and Macy showed her that Gerald III had acquired a small scarf since her last visit because it was still cold and Gerald III felt the cold more than the other Geralds. "That's responsible of you," Sophia said seriously. "I know," Macy said. Logan watched this from the kitchen doorway and felt something he didn't have a clean word for. Not happiness exactly, because happiness always felt like too light a word for anything real, but something durable and specific, the sensation of standing in a place you actually want to be. They ate at the kitchen table, all three of them, with food that was more ambitious than pasta and mostly successful, one dish slightly oversalted, which Macy pointed out with the diplomatic tact of a 7-year-old, which is to say, no diplomatic tact at all. Sophia said it was fine. Macy said it was a little much. Logan said he'd undersalt it next time. Macy said that would be good. After dinner, after Macy was in bed with all three Geralds arranged in the order she'd determined was socially appropriate, Logan and Sophia sat on the couch with the wine she'd brought and the specific quiet of an evening that doesn't require anything from either person in it. "I've been thinking," Sophia said, "about what happens now, for me, professionally." She turned the glass in her hands. A habit he'd come to know well, the thing she did when she was organizing her thoughts before saying them. "My consulting work took a hit during all of this. Some clients got nervous. I lost 2 accounts because of the press coverage." "I know," he said. He'd watched it happen and hadn't been able to do much about it from his own position. "But something else happened too," she said. 2 companies reached out to me in the last month. Both of them found me because of the investigation. Because of what I did." She looked up at him. "One of them is a corporate ethics consulting firm. They want to talk about a partnership. The other is a nonprofit focused on institutional accountability." She paused. "Which is, apparently, a field with real demand." "The thing you were afraid would ruin you professionally," he said, "turned out to be the thing that opened a different door." She didn't say it with triumph, more with the slightly disbelieving tone of someone who didn't want to oversell an irony in case it turned out to be less tidy in practice. "I'm not calling it a happy ending. I'm calling it a different beginning." "That's honest." "It's the most honest thing I can say about it." She looked at him. "What about you? Carter Blaine?" He'd signed a contract with Carter's firm 2 weeks earlier. Operations director, a role with real authority and real responsibility, working with a man who had hired him specifically because of who he'd shown himself to be in the worst circumstances. The irony of that was not lost on Logan either. "Started the first week of March," he said. "It's good work, hard work, which is what I needed." He paused. "Carter works you like he warned me he would. I don't mind it." "You've never minded hard work?" "No." She looked at him with the particular expression she had sometimes, the one that was doing several things at once. Seeing him, thinking about what she was seeing, deciding something based on the thought. "Logan," she said, "I want to say something and I want to say it tonight, specifically. Not in a text and not in passing. Okay?" She set her glass down on the coffee table and turned to face him more directly. Outside, the city was doing its late March thing. Not quite warm yet, but no longer brutal, the air carrying the first suggestion of what was coming without committing to it. "7 months ago, I made a bet on who you were," she said. "And every single day of the 7 months after that, you were exactly that person. Not a polished version of it, not on your best days and then something else on the hard ones. Just consistently yourself, even when being yourself was costing you things. She paused. I've been paying attention to that. He looked at her steadily. Let her finish. And I know we said we'd wait until things were clear, she continued. And things are clear now, so I'm saying it. Not to pressure anything or to put something on you, just because it's true and you should hear it from me directly. I love you. I didn't plan to, and I didn't expect to, and it happened anyway. Somewhere between the kitchen table at 2 a.m. and Gerald III's scarf. Her voice was steady and calm and completely unguarded. You don't have to say anything back if you're not there. I just needed it to be said. Logan looked at her for a moment. He thought about the car on the dark highway, the folder on his kitchen table, the deposition waiting room, the coffee on the front steps, the toy store and the hot chocolate, and the November afternoon and all the small true things that had accumulated between them without requiring permission. He thought about how Sophia had described love to Macy once in an entirely different context. Macy had asked why Gerald loved Gerald too, even though Gerald too was newer, and Sophia had said, without missing a beat, that love doesn't care about timing, it cares about showing up. I'm there, he said, simply without construction around it. I've been there for a while. I was waiting for the right time to say it, and I think I was wrong to wait. Something shifted in her face. Not a dramatic shift, just a settling, the particular ease of a person who has been braced for a possible impact that doesn't come. You're allowed to be wrong sometimes, she said. I know. I'm trying to get comfortable with it. She looked at him for a moment. Then she laughed. Not the almost laugh or the surprise laugh, but the real one, full and unguarded. And he felt it the way you feel things that are simple and true when the complicated hard period that preceded them has finally cleared enough to let the simple true things be visible. He reached across the couch and took her hand. She let him. They sat there in the quiet of his apartment with the city outside doing what cities do in late March, insisting on continuing, indifferent and loud and endlessly in motion. And for the first time in a long time, Logan Pierce felt something he recognized as peace. Not the performed version, not the version you choose to project when the other options are worse. The real kind, which doesn't announce itself and doesn't make promises, which just settles into the space that's been made for it and stays. He wasn't naive about what peace meant. He'd learned too much about himself in the past 7 months to be naive about anything. He knew that good things could be built on bad foundations without the people building them knowing it. He knew that people he respected could be capable of things he'd never have attributed to them. He knew that trust, once examined honestly, was always a bet and not a certainty, and that making the bet anyway was not stupidity, but necessity, because a life without trust was a life without anything worth protecting. What he also knew now, what the past 7 months had taught him in the way that only hard experience can teach things, at the level where they actually change how you see rather than just what you know, was how to tell the difference between someone who valued him and someone who valued what he was useful for. He hadn't known how to make that distinction before. He'd thought intelligence and capability were their own kind of integrity, that someone who was brilliant and competent had earned the benefit of the doubt. Victoria had taught him, at significant cost, that competence and character were separate things, that you could have one without the other in either direction, and that the only way to see what you were dealing with was to pay attention to how someone behaved when the stakes were real. Sophia had shown him what it looked like when both were present. She had done it not through a grand gesture, but through the accumulated weight of small, consistent choices, telling him the truth when lying was easier, showing up when distance would have been safer, being honest about her fear without letting it stop her, saying she loved him plainly and without manipulation in a way that required nothing from him in return. That was character. That was the real thing. And Logan understood now that the real thing was rarer and more valuable than he'd known how to appreciate before he'd been shown the difference. The months that followed the settlement were not simple. They were not meant to be. Logan had learned definitively to be suspicious of simple. But they were good in the way that things built carefully on honest ground tend to be good, with friction and effort and the occasional wrong note, and underneath all of it, something solid. His work at Carter's firm was demanding in the way Carter had promised it would be, and Logan found that the demand suited him. He was good at the job, genuinely good at it in a way that had nothing to do with proximity to someone else's reflected authority. He made decisions that were his to make, and took responsibility for the ones that went sideways and felt, for the first time in 4 years, like he was building something that actually belonged to him. It wasn't glamorous. There was no skyline view from his office window. There was a window that looked onto a parking structure and a coffee maker that only worked if you hit it twice on the left side, and a team of 8 people who were competent and occasionally difficult and entirely real. He preferred it to the alternative. Sophia's work with the ethics consulting firm developed slowly and unevenly, the way new things develop when they're built from scratch rather than inherited. There were months where the momentum felt real, and months where it felt like pushing against something immovable. She kept pushing. She was not, Logan had come to understand, someone who stopped pushing because something was hard. She was someone who adjusted her approach when the original approach wasn't working and kept going from the adjusted position. He admired that about her in a way that was different from the admiration he'd once had for Victoria. Grounded, clearly sighted, requiring nothing from him in exchange for being true. They argued sometimes, about small things mostly, logistics and preferences, and the specific friction that comes from 2 lives that have developed their own rhythms, trying to merge those rhythms without losing what made each one work. She thought he was too slow to ask for help when he needed it. He thought she made decisions emotionally at moments that warranted more deliberation. They were both partially right about each other, which was its own kind of intimacy, the kind that develops when 2 people know each other well enough to see the actual shape of their limitations and choose to stay anyway. Macy absorbed Sophia into her life with the unsentimental practicality of a child who has always understood, at some level she couldn't articulate, that family is something you build from whatever is available and real rather than something you receive in a fixed configuration. She taught Sophia the proper names and social hierarchies of all 3 Geralds. She explained her current scientific interests with the assumption that Sophia was as interested in them as she was, which Sophia largely proved to be. She asked questions that were occasionally embarrassing and always honest. She told Logan once, with complete matter-of-factness, that she liked Sophia because Sophia listened to her like she was a real person. Logan thought about that for a long time after Macy said it. The clarity of a child's criteria. She liked Sophia because Sophia listened to her like she was a real person. Not because she was impressive or beautiful or capable, though she was all of those things. Because she listened. He thought about Claire sometimes in this period, not with the weight of grief he'd carried for years. Because grief changes shape over time if you let it. It doesn't disappear, but it becomes something you can hold differently. He thought about what Claire would have made of Sophia. He believed, on most days, that she would have liked her. He believed this not because it made him feel better to believe it, but because it seemed true when he held it up to the light. Claire had valued honesty above almost everything else. She had been impatient with people who said one thing and meant another. She would have seen Sophia's willingness to do the hard right thing, and she would have respected it immediately. He didn't talk about Claire often with Sophia. When he did, she listened without trying to fill the space or redirect or make it about reassurance. She just let him talk and let it be whatever it was. And that, he understood, was also a form of love, the kind that's secure enough to leave room for everything that came before it. Victoria appeared in his awareness occasionally, the way things you've resolved tend to reappear, not as threats but as reminders of how far you've traveled. He saw her name in a business publication 6 months after the settlement, a brief item noting that she'd been appointed to the advisory board of a private equity firm not subject to the public company restrictions in her consent decree. He read it without the anger he might have expected. What he felt was closer to recognition. She was exactly who she was. She had always been exactly who she was. The version of her he'd constructed in his mind for 4 years had been his own work, not hers. She'd never claimed to be something she wasn't, not explicitly. She'd simply allowed the space for him to believe what was convenient for both of them. He didn't resent her for it anymore. Resentment required maintaining a relationship with someone in your mind, giving them ongoing space to be guilty in, and he didn't have the energy for that, and didn't see the return. What he'd taken from the experience, the real lasting thing, wasn't bitterness. It was clarity. A sharper sense of what he was looking for in people. a better calibrated ability to notice the difference between someone who respected him and someone who found him useful. That was worth the cost of the tuition, even if the tuition had been steep. He thought about this sometimes. The strange accounting of hard experience, what it costs and what it returns, and how the returns are never the ones you would have chosen, but are often, in retrospect, the ones you actually needed. He had needed to know the difference. He'd been walking through his life with a good heart and limited vision, trusting the wrong signals, confusing competence for character and respect for affection. He wouldn't have learned the difference any other way. He wouldn't have chosen the lesson. But he had it now, permanent and clear, and it was his. It was Mackey who named the street when Logan found the new apartment, the one they moved into the following October. A 2-bedroom plus a small third room that had been marketed as an office, but that Macy had, in the apartment tour, declared her room before anyone else could make alternative suggestions. It was on a quieter street than the old place, with better light and a landlord who fixed things promptly, and a small park at the end of the block that Macy could see from her new window. Sophia had her own apartment still, a few miles across the city, in her converted brownstone with the drafting table and the books and the Italian print on the kitchen wall. They were not moving in together, not yet, because they were both careful people who had learned the value of not rushing things that deserved to develop at their own pace. But she spent evenings and weekends with increasing regularity, and her handwriting appeared on the notepad on the kitchen counter, and her jacket was on the hook by the door. And Macy had allocated a specific drawer for Sophia's things in the bathroom without anyone asking her to. The proposal happened in late October, a year and 2 weeks after the night on the highway. Logan had not planned to do it on a particular night. He'd had the ring for 3 weeks, purchased after a conversation with Ray that was more emotionally sophisticated than either of them would later admit to, and he'd been waiting for the right moment without being sure what the right moment looked like, or whether he'd recognize it when it arrived. It arrived on a Tuesday evening when it was not trying to. They'd driven out to Westfield, not to the Ashford estate, which was not the relevant landmark, but to the highway rest stop about 2 miles past the point where the estate's turnoff was, the spot that was as close as he could get to the actual stretch of road where Sophia had been sitting in the back of a car with her clutch held in both hands, deciding whether to say the things she'd come to say. The rest stop was not glamorous. It had a vending machine and a pair of benches and a view of the highway in both directions, and the kind of institutional lighting that does nobody any aesthetic favors. Sophia had known they were driving out that direction, but not the specific destination. And when he pulled in, she looked at the rest stop with an expression that was equal parts puzzled and dawning. "This is," she started. "About 2 miles from where you got in my car," he said. "Give or take." She looked at him. He could see her understanding it. They walked to one of the benches and sat. The highway was quieter than it had been that October night. Less traffic, different quality of darkness. The lights of the city were visible on the horizon, soft and collective, the way city lights look from a distance when the night is clear. "I've been trying to figure out where the beginning was," Logan said, "for us, specifically. And I kept coming back to this stretch of road. Because everything that came after started with you deciding to say something that was hard to say." He looked at her. "That's the beginning. That's where we started." Sophia was very still beside him. She was watching him with the whole-body attention she gave to things that mattered, the listening he'd come to know and trust completely. "I've spent a lot of time in the past year thinking about what I actually want," he said. "Not what looks right or what's safe or what makes sense on paper. What I actually want, which is a different question." He paused. "The answer is you. It's been the answer for a while. I just wanted to say it here, where you first showed me what it looks like to tell the truth when it's hard, because I want to try to do the same." He took the ring from his jacket pocket. It was not elaborate. He'd gone simple and specific, a single stone set in a plain band, because Sophia was not a person who wanted something elaborate, and he'd paid enough attention to know that. He held it without putting any theater around it. "I love you," he said. "I want to build something with you that's actually ours, on ground we've both actually seen. I want Macy to grow up with you in her life. I want to have arguments about decision-making and make up after them. I want all the real version of it, not the arranged version, not the version that looks good from outside." He looked at her steadily. "Will you marry me?" Sophia looked at the ring. She looked at him. Her eyes were bright in the rest stop light. Not crying, not quite, but close to the edge of it in the way of someone who has been moved somewhere they weren't expecting to arrive. "This is a terrible location," she said. "I know. There's a vending machine." "I know that too." She looked at him for a moment longer. He waited, the way he'd learned to wait for things that deserved the patience. "Yes," she said, plainly, without performance, the way she said everything that mattered. "Yes." He put the ring on her finger. She looked at it for a moment, and then she looked at him, and then she laughed, the real laugh, the full one, and leaned into him on the bench at the rest stop on the highway with the city glowing on the horizon and the vending machine humming steadily behind them like the world's least romantic soundtrack. And Logan put his arm around her and held on, and the night was cold and clear and entirely, specifically real. They called Macy from the car on the way back. She answered on speakerphone with the faintly suspicious energy of a child who has been called outside of normal call hours. "What happened?" she demanded. "I asked Sophia to marry me," Logan said, a pause that lasted precisely long enough for Macy to process this. "Did she say yes?" "She said yes." Another pause. Then, with the decisive practicality that had defined her personality from approximately age 4, "Good. She should move into the office room." Sophia made a sound beside him that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob and landed as something uniquely itself. "The office room is yours," she said, when she could speak. "It already is," Macy said, with the confidence of someone who had filed this away as settled weeks ago, and hung up. Logan drove through the dark highway and felt Sophia laughing beside him and thought about how it all connected. The loss of Claire, which had broken him and rebuilt him in a shape he hadn't chosen. The 4 years at Ashford Group, which had given him a false foundation, and then, in falling, had shown him what real ground felt like. The night on the highway with Sophia, which had cost both of them things they hadn't expected to spend. The months of hard process and steadiness and small, ordinary moments that had accumulated without announcing themselves into something that mattered. None of it was the path he would have drawn for himself, not one part of it. He wouldn't have asked for any of the hard parts, and he couldn't honestly say he was grateful for the pain of them, in the abstract way that people sometimes claim to be grateful for their worst experiences. He was not grateful for Claire's death. He was not grateful for 4 years of misplaced trust. He was not grateful for depositions and legal pads and the specific humiliation of having someone publicly characterize his integrity as grievance. What he was on the other side of all of it, and standing on actual ground and holding the hand of a woman who had chosen honesty over safety and paid for it and kept going. And his daughter was at home with 3 stuffed elephants and strong opinions about cereal sugar content and a declared bedroom that she'd identified before anyone else had thought to ask. And the city was ahead of them, full of its own motion and noise and indifference and occasional grace. That was the thing nobody told you about hard experiences. They don't become good in retrospect. They just become finished. And what matters is what you build in the space they leave behind. Logan had lost a marriage to grief and a career to betrayal, and 4 years to a foundation that was never what he thought it was. In the space those things left, he had built, slowly and imperfectly, and with significant help from people who deserved the credit, something that was actually his. Macy's laughter, Gerald 3's scarf, a rest stop in October, a ring on Sophia's finger, the particular quality of ground that holds when you put your full weight on it. The city lights grew closer as he drove. Sophia had her head tilted back against the headrest, still smiling, her hand resting on the console between them. The road was clear and the night was cold, and somewhere ahead of them there was a little girl who had already decided the sleeping arrangements and was probably, Logan realized, also going to have opinions about the wedding. He was looking forward to all of it, every imperfect, ordinary piece of it. He kept driving, and the city came up to meet them, and the road behind them, the long, difficult, necessary road, was exactly what it was, behind them. That was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.